Hello, and welcome to another episode of EKU Online's eCast series. EKU Online's mission is to change lives by providing access to affordable, quality degree programs in meaningful disciplines that positively impact our society. Thank you for joining us. I'm Elizabeth Ballou with EKU Online. Today, we're joined by Nicola Mason, professor and chair of the Department of Teaching, Learning, and Educational Leadership in the College of Education and Applied Human Sciences. Dr. Mason has a bachelor's in music from Stellenbosch University in South Africa, a master's of music from Morehead State University, and a PhD from the University of Kentucky. Dr. Mason's research interests include the use of music as an instructional tool in the general elementary classroom, as well as traditional African songs and games. Her work can be found in several journals, including the Kentucky Journal of Excellence in Teaching and Learning, the Orff Echo, General Music Today, and the Bluegrass Music News. She's also a contributing author of EKU's first open access textbook and the first African American Studies open access text, From Slavery to Liberation. She was recognized as the 2019 American Orff Schulwerk Association Research Grant recipient and has been awarded EKU's Inclusive Excellence and Distinguished Equity Awards. Welcome, Dr. Mason, and thank you so much for your time today. We genuinely appreciate it.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
So let's get started. First off, I'm very curious. Can you tell us a little about your background? You completed your undergraduate degree in South Africa and your master's and PhD degrees in Kentucky. How and why did you decide to continue your education here in the U.S.?
Well, that's an easy answer. I do feel like my education in South Africa successfully prepared me for a career in music education. But the USA just offers extraordinary opportunities for individuals to learn and grow, especially educators and musicians. Attending workshops, conferences, meeting authors and researchers that I'd only ever read about, and interacting with so many like-minded, forward-thinking individuals is just kind of common practice here. I still consider myself a student, and I'm grateful for so many of the opportunities to continue learning, even in my role as an educator and as chair of the department. And living here in the United States provides those opportunities. If you're willing, then they're there for you for the taking.
Fantastic. Why Kentucky? What brought you to Morehead State and the University of Kentucky? And then also kind of segue into how did we get to have you here at EKU?
Sure. So I was the winner of a concerto competition, and we had a youth concerto competition during my undergraduate. I was a tuba performance major, and I won the competition, which is rather unusual for a tuba soloist to win that sort of competition. The conductor of the orchestra that was playing was a band director from Morehead State University. And so after rehearsals and performance, he offered me a graduate assistantship at Morehead State University. So it was just, one of those one-in-a-lifetime opportunities to come to the United States, learn as much as I possibly could, and take it back to my students, which is exactly what I did for a couple of years, but then decided to come back and do my PhD, do my terminal degree in education, and root myself here in Kentucky with my husband, who is from Kentucky as well. But EKU specifically, I've just always loved the campus and the people here. I spent several years at the University of Kentucky as a teaching assistant, and I loved the Research One institutions. But there's something special about EKU. It's big enough that there's enough diversity, but small enough that it still feels like home. And I think that's what kind of attracted me to the campus initially. As a faculty member 11 years ago when I first came here, EKU just offers an extraordinary amount of faculty support, especially for new faculty. And they've just provided opportunities to expand my scholarship and my research and my teaching. I don't know very many institutions that would support you teaching in two different departments as I have. Not only was I teaching in the then curriculum and instruction department, but also in the African American Studies program. I've always just been met with encouragement to grow and learn and lead, whether that was in my research and my teaching and my service. And so I knew instinctually after my interview that this was the place that I wanted to continue my journey in education.
Fantastic. Well, I'm so glad you landed here and that we get to have you. You're involved in the American Offshore Work Association and received a research grant from them. Can you please explain to our listeners what is offshore work and what did your research grant focus on?
Absolutely. So offshore work is just Karl Orff, who was the gentleman that's named after. Schoolwerk is just German for schoolwork, right? Schulwerk. And I don't know about you, Elizabeth, but if you remember doing music in elementary school, you may have had those little glockenspiels or xylophones or playing recorder. So you probably didn't even know that you were exposed to the offshore work approach to teaching music, but you probably will, because if you walk into most elementary music classrooms, you're going to see an array of those instruments. It's essentially an approach to teaching music to young children. It started in the 1920s and 30s in Germany, but it has blossomed like a wildflower around the world. I think inherently because it is so open to various musical styles and languages and cultures. So you're going to find the offshore back not only in first world countries, but in a lot of exotic countries as well. It's very, very popular in South Africa, all over Europe, Australia, the Middle East, a lot of countries around the world use the offshore work approach. It is an opportunity for in-service teachers to gain additional certification so they can get their offshore work certification after a few years of summer classes. And it's just a very creative way to integrate music in the elementary classroom. Now, the grant that I received annually, they award several $1,000s to recipients that are researching music education, and it's a bonus if it has to do with the offshore work. And so I collaborated with Professor Dr. Christine Carucci in the music department, where we were looking at ways that elementary teachers, so everyday elementary teachers, were using music as a tool for learning. There's so much research to support music as an instructional tool, to connect with students, because connection is so important as a teacher, but also to find ways to connect across content areas, because in reality, content areas don't live in their own little bubbles, they connect. So math and social studies connect, health and PE connect. And so we studied elementary teachers around the state of Kentucky to see what they did naturally in the classroom. And that was a way to inform professional development. So what do teachers need more of to be successful in the classroom? And then also to inform the Offshore Work Association of America on how they could support elementary teachers in their growth in using music as a teaching tool.
That's fascinating. And I do remember those were my favorite days in elementary school when they would bring out the glockenspiel and the different things for us to play with. And it's fantastic. So let's talk about teaching at the university level for a bit. What is your favorite course to teach here at EKU and why?
So I've had the privilege of teaching across different levels, undergraduate and graduate, both in-person, hybrid, ITV, eCampus. I've kind of dabbled in all of it. I would say, any of my music-related education classes are definitely my favorite. So I have an eCampus class called ELE 826, where we look at the use of music and the arts as a teaching tool for elementary teachers. This class is usually taken by our Master of Arts in Teaching students, and we explore ways that we can use art and music to support the different content areas and to make connections with students. I love that class because it's online and it's self-paced and it's graduate level students. And so it's very different working with grad students than it is with undergraduate students. I think they are more willing to take a chance, less afraid of making mistakes. But at the undergraduate level, I think one of my favorite classes over the last few years is my Culturally Responsive Perspectives class. This is a class that freshmen take. So there's a big difference between graduate students and freshmen, right, straight out of high school. And we explore topics like stereotyping and bias and privilege. And we take some real we take some real liberties with those topics because those topics can really impact us as teachers, and all education majors, elementary and middle grades, take this class. And we really do a deep dive and reflection on how stereotyping and bias and privilege can affect the way we interact with students, whether intentionally or unintentionally. When we know better, we do better. I think that's the famous Maya Angelou quote. And so I think that students really, it's amazing for an instructor to see those light bulb moments when students start thinking about their own actions and their own belief systems and how that can potentially impact how they interact with students.
That is fascinating. And it's true. I think so often it's unintentional. So I'm curious how, as freshmen coming in, straight out of high school, how are they responding to that course and the coursework?
Well, I mean, we joking, there's several of us that have taught it over the years, and we jokingly call it the light bulb moment class, because you can visibly see the light bulb going off. Because they're freshmen, a lot of them haven't necessarily been admitted into the teacher education program. So they are taking courses in education, but have not been officially admitted. And so they're thinking a lot more critically. Some of our students have instinctually known that they wanted to be teachers their whole lives, and maybe they've had opportunities to think about themselves and they do their own cultural audits. But a lot of them are just kind of dabbling and trying to figure out a pathway for themselves. And classes like this really get them thinking critically about different demographics, different religions, how that impacts the way they interact with students. We take a lot of things for granted. For example, certain holidays that we will instinctually refer to as Christmas break. But if all your students don't celebrate Christmas the way that a lot of us do, then that could be excluding students from a conversation. And so those are the kinds of things that we talk about and ways to handle those situations sensitively so that students feel included in all situations in the classroom.
That's great. It sounds like an incredibly valuable class, whether the students continue on into an education pathway or not. I think that's valuable in so many areas.
Well, and what's great about that class is it's just recently been adopted into the general education elective element 6. And so now it's open to all education majors. And that again just lends itself to even richer conversations, because in so many different professions, you're facing similar challenges, right? I think about the healthcare profession and how the challenges of different religions, but even any kind of industry, our worlds are becoming a lot more diverse. And it doesn't mean that the world that we came from was particularly diverse. And so, but the workforce that we're entering may be very diverse. And this allows us to kind of reflect on how we can be sensitive to that diversity, because at the end of the day, diversity doesn't mean deficit, right? Just because I'm different doesn't mean that I'm less than. And I think in many ways, diversity should be celebrated.
I agree. And I think just it helps you become, as you said, spread across all fields and areas. It helps you become a better coworker even, or a supervisor, or just to have that awareness. It's great.
Exactly.
So switching gears a little bit, you mentioned the graduate course that you teach online for students, and you talked a little bit about just the differences with graduate level students and the fact that it's self-paced. Can you talk a little bit more about what you enjoy about teaching online students, and then maybe some benefits and challenges that students need to think about before choosing to complete an online degree?
Absolutely. Well, I mean, I think it goes without saying, when you are in an online program or taking an online class, it does require a component of self-discipline. But I think it also provides a lot of flexibility. And sometimes you have to weigh, the self-discipline with the flexibility. So many of our students at the undergraduate or graduate level, but I'll refer to some of our undergraduates, even though they're traditional students living on campus, they still want that flexibility of an online class. And we're seeing that post-COVID more and more. And so, they're taking in-person classes, but they have that flexibility of some online classes as well. At EKU especially, a lot of our students are non-traditional students, and some of them are working 40 plus hours a week, and online classes are really their only option if they want to complete a traditional degree. And so, online instructors, I think, are a lot more sensitive to those kind of non-traditional situations, and kind of have the tools in their tool bucket to help students succeed in the online setting. I approach my online classes with a very different mindset than I do my traditional classes. I definitely accept late submissions. I'm a lot more flexible with excused absences in terms of deadlines and things like that than I am with the traditional setting. In the traditional setting, I tell my students on the first day of class, one of the big things about being a teacher is showing up every day. And that's the very least that we expect in the classroom setting as well. Showing up means different things if it's an online class. So deadlines are a lot more important because you have to show up for those deadlines. But communication is even more important in the online setting. Being willing to communicate when you have challenges that are setting you back or you require more explanation, it is very, very important. And so I try to tell the students that, on the first day of classes and reaffirm that throughout the semester, that as long as they communicate with me, I will work with them in any capacity to ensure their success in the class.
That's great. And that is, communication is so important. I know I've worked with online students and programs for a while now, and because you don't see them, on a regular basis, they need to be proactive in reaching out to their faculty and letting them know if something is going on, because thankfully, like you, most of our faculty are very willing to work with students, but they don't know what they don't know. And if you're having a hardship or something going on, that communication piece is so key.
It absolutely is. Yes.
I'd like to speak now a little bit about the teaching profession and field in general. In the news, there's a lot of talk about teacher shortages and just some challenges with those actually working in the field, in the classroom. Can you share your thoughts about what's going on, and is it really as bad as we're hearing?
I would say yes, exclamation mark. It really is as bad as we're hearing. Some of the statistics, even just in Kentucky, of the classes that simply are not staffed with teachers. We know that substitute teachers are also few and far between. Depending on who you ask, Elizabeth, some people say we don't have a teacher shortage. Rather, we have sort of a mass exodus out of the teaching profession. We've seen an unprecedented number of teachers leaving the profession in the past 3 years. There's no doubt that COVID has had a significant part of that. But politically, I think the climate currently has discouraged people from staying in the profession. There's a lot of statistics out there about people changing professions, not even just away from education, but just in general. The generation now seems to change profession far more regularly than perhaps your or my generation, which is also part of why higher ed has an obligation now to not only prepare people for a specific profession like teaching or nursing or whichever profession, but just to be excellent professionals. If you think about the general education curriculum, we're looking at a lot of focus on essential employability skills. So what are some of the components that stretch across any profession, whether it's teaching or not? And communication, like we just talked about now, is one of those. The ability to work with people from diverse backgrounds, that stretches across any profession. The ability to think critically, quantitative reasoning skills, all of those things. We're seeing a big push across every discipline to strengthen those within students. At the end of the day, we are trying to recruit more people to the teaching profession. And there are a lot of institutions at the community college level, all the way through 4-year programs that are creating new initiatives and researching ways that we can remove barriers for students who are interested in education. I don't know if you know some of the tests that are required for admission into the teacher education program. One of them is called the Praxis Core exam. There are now other options other than taking the Praxis course. So if you have a certain test score, ACT score, you can go with that test score instead of the Praxis core. We're looking at ways to fund, especially minority candidates into the teaching profession. EKU now has a pathway with BCTC, where you can complete your associate's degree at BCTC in 2 years and then come to EKU and complete your last 2 years for a 4-year degree in teacher preparation, which will lead to certification as well. So lots of out-of-the-box thinking that has happened that perhaps we've talked about a lot over the years, but the last few years have really required that we not just talk now, that we put words into action, and that we address the teacher shortage, because, you know, teacher shortage is impacts every profession. I think about most professions, you know, people will contribute their career choices to perhaps a teacher in high school or elementary school or middle school that encourage them in a certain area, and that's why they do what they do. Teachers are so important to every component of our community and our society. So it really is it really is something that we have to address across every discipline.
It is. It's so important. So it sounds like, as you said, a lot of out-of-the-box thinking and ideas and new ways to encourage people and make that pathway easier. But if you had a chance to just talk to someone who maybe was thinking about entering the profession but was hesitant because of the current climate, what would you say to them to encourage them to move forward?
Well, I'd say every profession has its challenges, right? What's that old adage? If you love what you do, you won't work a day in your life. And I really do believe that about teaching. Teaching is in many ways a calling. Now, some of us are called to it early on. I have plenty of students who have always known they wanted to be a teacher, but then I have just as many students who come to us as transfer majors, maybe from another discipline, or maybe they hadn't declared a major, and they take a couple of classes or they spend some time in the schools as part of their clinical training, and they realize that they feel a real connection with students in the way that they perhaps didn't realize they had before. And that's absolutely okay. We've also seen an unprecedented number of students coming to our Master of Arts in Teaching program. So these are students that have an undergraduate degree in a completely unrelated discipline, not related to teaching, maybe just a content-specific degree, but have realized that teaching is something that they really want to do. And then they can do a 2-year Master of Arts in Teaching program with us. And that will prepare them to either be early childhood teachers, elementary, middle, or secondary, special education, different content areas. And now in Kentucky, and I talked about out-of-the-box thinking, you can actually, from the first day that you're an MAT student, be teaching full-time in the schools. That never used to be an option. You'd have to get the degree and the teacher certification first, and then you go into the schools. But now in Kentucky, under option 6, you can teach full-time while you are pursuing your MAT degree. It is a booming program. We have never seen the kind of enrollment that we've had, and it has really required that we rethink some of our classes to prepare teachers for a much more diverse classroom. But I think COVID in many ways has set our instructors up in a new way. They're far more equipped to provide online instruction in an effective way now than they ever have before. And I think partly that is why our MAT program at EKU specifically is so popular in Kentucky now.
Great.
Mm-hmm.
So there's so much changing in education, in the field of education. As you mentioned, we're not just teaching students in the master's degree online, but now many of the K through 12 teachers are having online components to their in-classroom, and just everything that's going on. How do you stay up to date in those fields of education and teaching?
Well, and this is a really important question, because I talk about this with our students as well. And it's really important that they stay up to date, because the field of education is constantly evolving, right? We are preparing teachers to go into a classroom that we don't even know what it's going to look like in 5 years' time. We're preparing them for a future that we're not completely sure is going to to look like. And so, we encourage our students to become part of organizations. There are various discipline-specific organizations at the state and national level that will have workshops and conferences, that have journals, that have up-to-date research. Some of them are a lot more scholarly, academic writing, and some of them are very practical activities that you can take straight into your classroom after you attended a workshop or a conference. And so we always encourage our students to participate that, and we actually do it at the undergraduate level already. We have several student organizations, the Kentucky Educators Association, Educators Rising, the Council for Exceptional Children, so a variety of organizations that we encourage students to participate in, and then to continue doing that as teachers, to ensure that they continue learning. We're lifelong learners, right? Once you get the degree, you don't know it all, because the climate is changing so rapidly. So it's really important that teachers are involved in their organizations, so that they can stay informed in their discipline.
That's great.
Mm-hmm.
There's so much happening.
There is, yeah.
You talked quite a bit about the Master of Arts in Teaching for those who have a bachelor's degree in another field, but now want to get into the teaching profession. How about those who have a bachelor's degree in education and are already certified as a teacher? Why should they continue on and get their master's degree in education? Are there additional opportunities available for those who complete advanced degrees? And then you mentioned a lot of good reasons why the Master of Arts in Teaching is great at EKU. What about the Master of Arts in Education, and why completed it with us at EKU?
Well, I think I said earlier that, teachers are lifelong learners, and because the climate is constantly changing in teaching, it's so important that teachers continue learning. And there's so many ways they can do that now. There's so many options. They can do courses through their co-op, through CEOs, but the only place to get a degree, and with a degree comes a rank change, which also contributes to a pay increase in Kentucky, is to do our MAD in either elementary, middle, special education. We have a variety of options. We talk about the climate in education and our classrooms changing so significantly, and I'll just use a few examples. Fayette County, for example, we currently have an agreement with Fayette County. They're in their second year now, are sending their teachers to get ESL endorsed. So English second language learners are the fastest growing population in Kentucky. Fayette County now has more than 50% students of color. Many of those students are ESL students. So English is either their second or their third language at home. And that change has really happened pretty quickly over the last decade. And a lot of our teachers feel ill-prepared to provide the kind of support that students like that need. And so taking classes in ESL, or English language learners that we prefer to refer to it, really provides them with the support to help students like that. And that is just one of many examples. I think about the various approaches that we have to working with students with special needs, students with social and emotional learning, even gifted and talented students. What do we do with those students that excel, and how can we support their learning? There are courses and opportunities for teachers to become leaders and administrators. Often that's a path for a lot of teachers. And the only way to do that is to complete your master's in education or your education and specialist degree. And so I think EKU has a proven track record of exceptional learning experiences at the graduate level. A lot of those programs are online, but we also like to listen to what our teachers need. We recently introduced both an online and an in-person MAED in school leadership. So now our schools have the option of having either the flexibility of online learning or the connection with the in-person program as well. And that's just one of many ways that we are constantly interacting with our schools and our teachers to find what their needs are. Because in 3 short years, we've seen the conversation change significantly in terms of when we look at needs assessments for schools.
That's great. So many opportunities, so many changes, so many challenges right now. So I feel like as you discussed, education and being a lifelong learner is a great way to address and be prepared for those changes and challenges. So
exactly. Yep.
thank you. So I know you're awfully busy in your role as chair and educator and researcher. Hopefully, though, you have some free time. I like to always wrap up these interviews with just hearing a little bit about what you like to do when you do find free time, or hobbies, things you enjoy.
I love to fly, Elizabeth. It's something that I do as much in my spare time as possible. I'm trying to get my private pilot's license, which is just something I do in my spare time and on weekends. There's something very liberating about being in the air above the ground. I think it gives you a little bit of a different perspective of the world. It helps you appreciate the things in a new way when you view things from a different angle. And I often use that as a metaphor for so many things in life. But just practically, I have a very long commute to and from work every day. I live in Rowan County, so I cross 4 counties to get to work every day. I pass 3 schools every morning. And so I think just the possibility of maybe flying to work, because we have an excellent program here at EKU as well, just kind of drives me a little bit. Maybe a pipe dream of mine would be to fly to work in the mornings instead of driving every day. But that's just a pipe dream. We'll see.
That's fascinating. I had no idea that you flew. That's great. How did you get interested in that or even started?
Sure. So I live across the road from a regional airport, and I'm a runner as well. And so I often run to the airport because there's very little traffic on the road. And so I've just always admired the airplanes. I've always been fascinated by airplanes, and took a couple of lessons several years ago and just kind of got hooked, and just love the quiet up in the air. And especially living in Kentucky, if you go flying now with the changing colors of the leaves, it's quite extraordinary. We have such a limited view of Kentucky when you're on the interstate, and seeing it up from the sky just gives you a new appreciation for how gorgeous the state of Kentucky is.
That's fantastic. I love it. So that's the end of the formal questions that I have for you. Is there anything else you'd like to share today with our listeners or anyone who might be dropping in on this podcast?
I would just encourage them to reach out to us if they have ever had an inclination of going into the education profession. There are so many pathways within education. I think, not just limiting yourself to thinking about education as perhaps being in a classroom, but there are so many research opportunities in education. If I think about at the state level, how many people are involved in education that has nothing to do with actual teaching, but has to do with research and statistics and communication and providing resources for teachers. In order for teachers to be successful, they need a whole community of people behind them. So if anybody has ever been interested in education in any capacity, to reach out to us. We have a slew of incredible coordinators that are just ready and eager to answer questions and to brainstorm and to look at ways to bring you into the education profession.
Thank you so much. That's great. That is one of the great things, like you mentioned earlier about EKU. It's big enough that there are lots of opportunities and diversity of perspectives, but still, on an individual level, so many people willing to work with students and reach out and communicate with them. So thank you for reiterating that. And thank you so much for your time this morning. I've really enjoyed speaking with you and getting to know you a little better. So thank you again for your time.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Bye.
Bye.